what we plan to do is I'm going to just spend maybe about 20 to 25 minutes to talk about the Special Needs Trust scheme in Hong Kong. And then Bill will take over and talk a bit more about trusts and offer some comments on the Hong Kong scheme. Perhaps, since we are talking about the Special Needs Trust scheme, we can't avoid starting with the basic question, what is a trust? Now, a trust is very much a legal arrangement. It's just like you can enter into a contract, a binding contract, you can also enter into a trust with people. So I'm going to just talk about the very basic idea of a trust. So in a trust, you have said law, who is the owner, the original owner of some property. If the owner wanted someone else to look after the property for him, said law can transfer the property to someone called the trustee, who is essentially the manager. So after the property is transferred to the trustee will have legal title, will have title over the property. In Cantonese, in Hong Kong, we call it Yip Kun, and in the mainland, that's 财产权. Which means that once a trust is set up, you could see that if, say, it's a flat, then the name on the title deed would be that of the trustee, not the said law. Now, you would think, why would you do such a thing? You give property to someone else. Now, the arrangement is that the trustee will manage the property, but the trustee also has a duty to manage it for the benefit of the beneficiaries. In other words, the trustee has power to manage the property, but only to use this power for the benefit of the beneficiary. So in this way, you can split the management of the property with the benefits that you could get from the piece of property. Now, as I said, the property is managed on behalf of the beneficiary who has a right to receive the benefits. So it could be as simple as this, or maybe we can add some variation to it. There are lots of ways to add variations to it. One variation is you could say that the property is to be managed for the beneficiary when the beneficiary is still alive. But when the beneficiary passes, it could be to C and D, to other beneficiaries, to be split equally. So what this creates is something like this. For example, when I pass, I want my husband to be able to stay in our flat, but I also want my children to inherit the flat after my husband passes. So I could create such an arrangement where as long as my husband lives, he will have the benefit of the flat so that he has somewhere to stay. But when he passes, the money or the flat will go immediately to my children. Now, people do this because, for example, there's always the worry that if you just give the full property to the husband may remarry. Or when he passes, then the property will end up with someone else, not your own children. So we call C and D, the children, residuary beneficiaries because they are to benefit from the residue of the property. So this is the basic idea of a trust. Who in Hong Kong have set up a family trust? Well, can I just ask how many of us here have a family trust? None of us. Well, I don't have one either, but these people, and I'm sure you know who they are, just very, very quickly, they are famous cantopop singers, Li Ka-shing, the richest man in Hong Kong, last I checked, and Anita Mui, another very famous singer. Now, what's common amongst them that we don't share with them? They have lots of money. We don't. Now, the reason why the family trust could be such a great thing, but people it's not so widely used is because it is very expensive to set up in Hong Kong. For example, if you want to set up a trust, you want to engage a professional to do it. HSBC trustee takes up about 60% of the market share, if not more. The fees that they charge per annum is about 1 to 2% of the total assets that they're holding. So each year, you'd be paying 1 to 2% of the total assets. So after 10 years, you lose 10% in a sense. And so it's not worth setting up a trust unless you have a lot of money. And the trust can help you save taxes so that the fee that you paid is worth paying. Now that creates a problem, actually, for people with disability and parents of people with disability, because they know that when they pass, they're worried what's going to happen to their children because they can't afford a private trust, and yet their children are not capable or they do not have the capacity to manage the property. Here comes the Special Needs Trust. I wondered I don't know if you've seen the Special Needs Trust flyer that was produced by the Special Needs Trust office in Hong Kong and a recent television program about the Special Needs Trust. And we're very lucky in Hong Kong in a sense that the Hong Kong government was willing to act as trustee, and they launched the scheme in March or December. I say March/December because they started accepting inquiries in March and accepting applications in December 2018. Now, do you know how many trusts, how many special needs trust accounts have been opened through this scheme so far since 2018? 15. You would have thought, wow, how come it's such a wonderful thing? Why are there so few people taking it on? So I'm going to take you through how the Hong Kong scheme operates to sort of give you a flavor of what it does and aspects where perhaps there's room for improvement. Now, here's the structure of the Hong Kong Special Needs Trust. So you've got parents, a large group of parents who actually pool their money together through this trust scheme. And the trustee is the Hong Kong government, specifically the Director of Social Welfare Incorporation. So the government pooled and make investments together because if it's a pooled fund, it'd be easier for them to make investments. And after the parents pass it, then they would make periodic payments to the beneficiaries through the caregivers of the beneficiaries, so that the caregivers of the beneficiaries can look after the special needs children. So the idea is that you're pooling the funds together, but they are operating as separate accounts. Now, how exactly does it work? 4 steps. First, the parents will need to open a trust account with the scheme. How do you open a trust account? You start by signing a trust deed, but in the Hong Kong scheme, you are not allowed to name any residuary beneficiaries to take the surplus. So the Hong Kong scheme is such that if there's still surplus after the special needs beneficiary passes, you as parent cannot in advance name somebody to take it. Now that raises a lot of question marks. What's the next step? You write a letter of intent indicating who you want the caregiver to be, and you also write a care plan. I've got some standard documents here to show you what they look like. As you can see, the care plan actually covers quite a lot of details about daily needs, medical needs, and even courses that they take, accommodation, and so on. And then For the Hong Kong scheme, you would need to prepay any of these two amounts, whichever is the higher. And that is either 1 full year of expenses in your scheme, plus the administration fee, or 240,000, which is the minimum. And this 240,000 is based on the monthly median personal income in Hong Kong, which is 20,000 per month. The idea of this requirement is that the government thinks that because once the parents pass, it may take a year or so for a lot of the substantial amount of the money to be poured into the trust through a will. That's why the government wanted some standby funds so that it can kickstart right away and that there won't be disruption. But this amount is quite substantial. If you add them together, it's almost $250,000. Right? Then another document you do is to execute a will, and the will have to include a gift of what you want to pour into the SNC account. So that's the documents that you set up. What next? When the parent is still alive, the account is dormant. In other words, it's like opening a bank account. Nothing happens except some basic maintenance. And these basic maintenance include that the money would be, that the prepayment that you made would be kept in a bank account. And currently they're in time deposits. But you can immediately see that there is a bit of an issue here because you're talking about $250,000. And parents are not going to pass so soon. So possibly the money will be kept there for 10 years or even more. And yet the only investment is in terms of putting money in time deposits. And the interest rate these days are better, but previously are not so good. So essentially you're freezing some money in a bank account. And for a lot of people, $250,000 is a lot of money. And then from time to time, at least once a year, the Special Needs Trust Office, which is housed under the Social Welfare Department, will review the care plan based on the special needs beneficiaries' needs and may request a top-up. And finally, there's a bit of a problem with the current arrangement, and that is once you've created the trust, even before the parent passes, the trust is already set up. So the money put in there will belong in substance to the special needs beneficiary. So in terms of property law, they are treated in substance as the money or as the property of the special needs beneficiary. So they will immediately lose their CSSA entitlements if they previously were able to do that, because they will not be able to satisfy the means test. There is also a concern, and that is if they have so much money, that would mean that if, for example, somebody marries them, and that person being this special needs person's spouse will, on that person's passing, automatically inherit half of the property, or if that's just this spouse, all of it. So there's concern of gold diggers, people who might come and actually sort of befriend your special needs child who has a special needs trust account in order, to wait for the possibility of, that good prospect. Now, you may be able to try to get around that by having the special needs beneficiary make a will to give it to somebody, to give the money to somebody that you want. But then these special needs beneficiaries usually don't have capacity to make a will, which makes things really hard. Now, then the next step, when the parent passes, the account is then activated, so to speak. What this means is that on their passing, there's a will, and the executor of the will would then make the gift to the special needs trust account. And that would be a substantial pouring of assets into the special needs account. And from there, the money will be distributed periodically to the caregiver. Now, here, there's some question here. What if the parent simply loses capacity and not pass? Currently, in the Hong Kong scheme, the SNT account is not yet activated. So you've got to make some separate arrangement for your loss of capacity. And then what if the executor does not do his or her job properly? Then there would have to be litigation. There would have to be court procedures to compel them to do that. But whatever money you pay to get the lawyers to do that actually eats into the trust account. And then the Special Needs Trust Office would arrange monthly payment to the caregiver and also review the scheme once a year. Now then, I'll see if I can move this away. What if there's emergency expenditures? There's room for you to provide for that. And then what if you've got a caregiver, but the caregiver passes, right? Because they may not last forever. Now, this is a good thing about the Hong Kong scheme, and that is you can provide for institutional caregivers. And these are the 4 institutions that act as institutional caregivers. Because they are charities, they'll be of there not being any caregiver. Right, finally, when the beneficiary passes, the account is then terminated. Now, when would this happen? Either when you run out of money, that makes sense, or when the beneficiary passes or emigrates. Now, the question here is, what if there is some residue left? There's still money in the account when the beneficiary passes. Now, if the beneficiary has a will, then the money will be distributed according to the terms of the beneficiary's will. However, as we said, some of these beneficiaries probably don't have capacity to make a will. So in most cases, there's no will. And that would mean that when they pass, the residue, the surplus in a trust account would be distributed according to the intestate estates ordinance. And for them, they are unlikely, or quite a few of them may not have spouses or children. The money will then go to rather remote next of kins, which the parents may not want. So in light of this overview of the Special Needs Trust, why is it that there's such limited uptake? I thought I'll just go through and in a way quickly summarize ways in which I think the current scheme can be improved. If you look at it, look at the current feature, just ask yourself, who will benefit from the scheme the most? Well, if you look at the scheme design, there's an upfront payment of about $250,000. Also, the administrative fee is a flat rate of $20,000 per year, which means the more money you have, the percentage that you pay is smaller. Whereas the smaller the amount that you put into the trust, because it's a flat rate, proportionately you're actually paying more. So it's not a progressive fee scale. And so in a way, if you have lots of money, if you don't mind just keeping $250,000 elsewhere, then the scheme can be attractive. But even then, the beneficiary may lose CSSA, Social Security entitlements, and again, maybe for the very, very well-off, that doesn't matter. And even for them, there's still a problem, and that is they cannot name any residuary beneficiary. So what they do nowadays is that they make sure that they've set up the account, but they don't put in so much money. They just make separate arrangements to pump money in from time to time to make sure that there's not much in the residue. And again, there's unfortunate timing, because soon after the scheme was launched, there's a social movement, and there's also COVID. So that probably accounted for the low take-up here. Now, I understand from Simon that there may be people in line attending from Mainland China, and I just wanted to flag this with you. The scheme itself, even though I think has got lots of rooms for improvement, the idea of the Special Needs Trust, I think it's an excellent thing. It's just that the scheme in Hong Kong can be tweaked, can be improved. And in fact, most recently, in March 2023, Mainland China has issued a regulation which lists the Special Needs Trust. Sorry, it's in Chinese, where the arrow list, that refers to Special Needs Trust. It lists the Special Needs Trust as one of the main trust products that trust companies ought to be offering. So there is indeed a need for this. We just need to come up with a scheme that would work for people. And for those in the Mainland, if you're interested, this is a book that my colleague Rebecca Lee and I co-edited and was translated into Chinese. If you wanted to find out a bit more about these, here's the book. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Lusina. I think it's always good to have someone heavily involved in the design of the trust, and then after some time, looking back, having some reflections on that, and to really make some suggestions in a way, how the whole thing can be improved, etc. So thank you very much, Lusina. Very insightful. And now we have Bill. Professor William Swadling from Oxford. He's an authority, I think, from his perspective as a sort of outsider, right? would have something to say based on his experience, the UK experience, the UK practices. Maybe we can draw more insights from that. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Lusina, as well. So what I thought I'd do is just say something generally about trusts. Lusina's already outlined them, but I understand from Simon that people are naturally scared or suspicious, or they just don't know what a trust is. Many law students don't know what a trust is, I find. And so just explain briefly about trusts in general, and then try to say something about how trusts are used in England for vulnerable beneficiaries, and maybe make some comments also on the Hong Kong version. We don't have a special needs trust in England, nothing like the Hong Kong version, and maybe we should. But as Lusina said earlier, when we use the word trust, we're talking about an arrangement where one person, the trustee, is given some generally money, but it could be shares, it could be real property, it could be any asset. That trustee is given some rights, and they're holding them for the benefit of other people. We call those the beneficiaries, or they might be holding them for charitable purposes. And I suppose the one thing we should maybe just make clear at the beginning is that although the relief of persons who are ill is a charitable purpose, that won't work for specific individual beneficiaries. If that's for building a hospital or finding a cure for cancer or something like this. So we're not talking about charitable trusts in our context where we're talking about vulnerable beneficiaries. We're necessarily talking about what we call private trusts rather than public trusts. And these trusts can be set up either during the lifetime of the settlor. The settlor is the person who creates the trust, or they can be set up by will. And the Hong Kong Special Needs Trust is a sort of amalgam of both, because it's set up during the lifetime of the settlor, but the main capital injection comes on the death of the settlor, because obviously that's the point at which the parent themselves can no longer look after the special needs beneficiary. One of the problems, if you're setting up a trust generally, is, well, who do I trust to be my trustee? It's a very, very difficult decision to make. Do you use just family friends? Well, trouble is, family friends might not have the expertise to manage large sums of money. Family friends can die themselves. You need to worry about the trustee surviving beyond the settlor's lifetime. And another thing is, there's always the worry about that family friend might be tempted to just borrow some money from the trust fund if they suddenly can't pay the rent or something like this. The great thing about the Hong Kong Special Needs Trust is that the government acts as the trustee. So you've got a corrupt-proof trustee, a trustee that's going to survive because it's a corporation. This trustee is not going to suddenly die, and also the trustee has expertise. One thing Lusina mentioned was this money is invested only in time deposits. It's not invested to sort of generate anything other than a sort of return which will beat inflation, I think is the thinking. But the fees you pay in terms of trustee management are much, much smaller than you would do if you were using a professional trustee. As Lusina said, a professional trustee is charging 1 or 2% per annum of the total capital sum, and that certainly quickly eats into the money available. So one of the things about the Hong Kong Special Needs Trust is that you are getting quite a good service for a relatively cheap fee. A problem, though, as Lusina has pointed out, is the special needs beneficiary, because this is what we call a fixed trust. The special needs beneficiary is treated by the benefits people, those providing means-tested benefits, as basically having this money in their own pocket. And in England, one way round that is to use what we call a discretionary trust. And under a discretionary trust, the trustee holds the money, and the beneficiaries are a group of people. There'll be more than one person. So it might be, for example, the vulnerable beneficiary, but also any siblings they might have, or even cousins. You need to put some other people into the class. And then what the trustee has is the discretion to pay out income to the vulnerable needs beneficiary as and when they need it. And what that ensures is that the vulnerable beneficiary is not themselves seen as having that capital sum. And so they're not disqualified from means-tested benefits. Basically, the trustee can turn on the tap and turn off the tap according to what's best from a taxation point of view or from a benefits point of view. And that's not possible at the moment in the way the Special Needs Trust is designed. At the moment, it's just going to cut off the means-tested benefits. And so in England, the discretionary trust is the vehicle which is used, not the fixed trust of the Special Needs Trust. But going in the other direction, it's the cost involved with the discretionary trust, because you're usually using a bank or something like this which are charging big fees, whereas the Special Needs Trust is relatively cheap. The other advantage of the discretionary trust is that on the death of the beneficiary, there's nothing that has to go down their will or through the rules of intestacy, because they don't have anything unless it's been allocated to them. And so, as Lusina was saying, one of the problems with the special needs trust is, well, what happens on the death of the special needs beneficiary, especially since they won't often be able to make a will, is going to go through the rules of intestacy. None of that will apply in the case of if you're using a discretionary trust, because then, as I said, the interest of the special needs beneficiary just comes to an end. Immediately, they die. And so it's possible in the trust to make provision, the settlor can make provision as to where the money is to go. It might go, well, they just got a completely free choice. And the problem also that Lusina mentioned about gold diggers, that doesn't apply either, because again, the beneficiary under the discretionary trust has nothing until the money reaches their hands. There's no, just being the beneficiary of the trust doesn't entitle them to anything other than to be considered by the trustee as someone to whom some money might be given. So the gold digger will be out of the picture. The problems about what to do on the death of the special needs beneficiary would also disappear. One problem with using a trust in England is that people would normally set them up in a will, and then, as Lusina said, there's often a gap between the date of death and the executors handing over the money to the trustees. And I think one of the great advantages of the special needs trust is that they cater for that. You know, that's why you're having to make this big upfront payment of $260,000. The idea is that that money can be used immediately for the needs of the special needs beneficiary whilst we're waiting for the capital injection from the will. So that's I think a very good aspect of the special needs trust in Hong Kong. Another thing which you wouldn't get under a discretionary trust, but you do get in the Hong Kong system, is that the special needs office seems to act as they meet up with the beneficiary and they check to see what's going on. There's a problem about administration of the trust, checking up on the trustee once the trust is up and running. And we couldn't expect the special needs beneficiary to do that. And then the question is, well, who is going to do that? In England, we don't really have a solution to that. Whereas in Hong Kong, the government can be trusted, we hope, with this money, but also they appoint somebody in the department to review the plan, to meet with the beneficiaries after the death of the settlor and make sure things are going on well. And also there's a provision for the appointment of caregivers as well, which I think is unknown in England. And the caregivers would generally be more than one. You'd prioritize these people because obviously they can then die as the trust goes on. So those sorts of facilities are not available in England. So there is some, I think, very good features of the special needs trust. As Lusina said, there is, however, some room for improvement. It would be good if it could be structured in a way that it didn't impact on means-tested benefits. I think it would be good if the settlor was given some ability to decide where the surplus money goes on the death of the special needs beneficiary. If those two things could be sorted out, I think it would be a wonderful package.
Yes. Thank you very much, Bill, for the insights, and when he compares the discretionary trust with what we had in Hong Kong now, what Lusina and her team has set up for Hong Kong, we see a lot of good things in the special needs trust. Now, I think there will be a lot of questions from the floor, on the site or online. Just feel free to ask. I just spotted one question from someone online. It's more about I think it's the implementation of the whole thing. Is about the Hong Kong government. Okay, the scale of the trust at the moment, and also the participants, and also the amount of money in there. I think Lusina, you mentioned something about the trust setup at the moment. It's just like 15 at the moment, right? But do you have any other further information to supply in response to that question?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have more information to offer on that front, in terms of how much fees or how much funds have been collected. And this is because it varies, right? Because it depends very much on the individual schemes. I could imagine that those who have already set up the trust tend to be parents who are generally well off, and so they wouldn't be paying the minimum $250,000. They probably would be paying more than that. And these funds currently are actually kept in time deposits. In fact, it is already an improvement from the original trust deed, which was just to put it in a current bank account. Now, subsequently, the government made the improvement and decided to put them in, sort of safe times deposits. So you could see that actually, I think efforts have been made within the existing framework to enhance the scheme.
Okay. Yeah.
On termination of the account, SNT account, other than passing of the beneficiaries, another is the immigration of the beneficiaries, which I have no presentation. I wonder if it implies that the duties of the trustee is territory-based or territory-bounded, meaning that once the beneficiaries immigrate to other cities or other areas, the whole scheme for the beneficiary is terminated. I also wonder whether these features also apply in the UK, meaning that whether the trustees' duties will cover in an area wider than the UK or also territory bounded.
Okay, thank you for your question. Maybe both of you can respond to that, right?
You want to start?
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. You're right to say that the beneficiary of the Special Needs Trust has to be resident in Hong Kong, and if they leave Hong Kong, then the trust will come to an end. And that's fair enough. The Hong Kong government says, well, why should we administer this trust for someone who's not resident in the region? Under an English trust, it doesn't matter where you live, because the set law is basically paying the trustee for the administration, and the bank is quite happy to take the fees wherever the beneficiary is living. So there is nothing like that in English law that it would come to an end.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. I mean, that's a very, very good question. But I fully understand, and as Bill said, it was fair enough because the Hong Kong government simply has. I mean, it'd be extremely difficult for the Hong Kong government to continue to monitor the caregiver, for example, once the beneficiary has emigrated, because imagine the cost and the expenses that would involved in having perhaps to travel overseas to visit these beneficiaries. So for me, even though it might be a restriction as compared to private family trust, it is a fair one.
Okay, thank you. I've got a supply of information online concerning the number of applications. The most updated numbers number of applications that the Social Welfare Department has received up till now in the past 5 years. It's just 65 applications. Okay, yeah. This is thank you for the friend online for the supply of that piece of information. And here comes another 2 questions. The first one is on this. Just if I just repeat directly from the chat box. Just if the family cannot offer in one-off fund, say 260,000 right now, is monthly installment possible? That is, I think that's a policy thing, right? The second question is about absolute trust equals potential loss of Social Security. Okay, how about discretionary trust in the UK, in England?
Thank you. Thank you for the information. Yeah, there are 65 applications, but 15 completed applications. So what we see is that, well, actually, if you also take into account the number of inquiries made, they are in thousands. So there's actually a lot of interest, and the 65 that have applied, but have not completed, maybe they're in the process of doing it, but it is also possible that a lot of parents are adopting a wait-and-see approach. They see the need for setting up an account, but at the same time, they probably want to wait and see, or perhaps they feel that they'll start the process first, and if they hear news about, their ill health or something, they'll start to put it in, because, then you don't have to start afresh when the need arises. So, I mean, that might be a possibility. Monthly installments for the upfront payment, unfortunately, that's not available. And also, as to the last point about absolute trust being or having the effect of losing Social Security entitlements. I mean, on that, I see the government's point of view, and that is, if you have a private company helping you set up a trust, the private trust company would probably sort it out in such a way as to reduce your tax liability, and also to make sure that you still receive your entitlements to social benefits. But it's the Hong Kong government who is setting up this trust. If they allow people to use a discretionary trust to do that, I could see that they find it a bit conflicting because they're actually helping people save, or they're helping people get Social Security benefits, when in fact these people do have the money in a certain sense. So that's really a policy matter, I suppose.
Right. Do you have anything to say about it? Okay, thank you. Now, there's another question now. This friend, thanks for the presentations, and she said, I'm wondering who are really interested in the scheme. I mean, if the parents are really well off, they can have their private arrangements. On the other hand, if they don't have the money, say can't even settle the upfront payment, they won't join the scheme. So who are the exact targets of the scheme? I think that is actually a problem, right?
Yeah, well, I think the original sort of intention of the scheme was that it was meant for the middle class. And in other words, the feeling was that if you've got so little funds that you can put into the scheme, it's probably not worth doing it. To go through all the expenses to set up the thing. But the middle class couldn't afford private trustee fees. And what the government wanted to do is to mobilize the middle class to make these arrangements so that these children wouldn't fall into the safety net, the Social Security safety net, because a lot of parents were thinking if they couldn't make such arrangements, they might as well just, spend the money first before they part and let their children fall into the basic social security safety net. So in a way, it's a middle class. I suppose the question then is the middle class is very, very wide as well. So, which bit of the middle class is the SNT catching? It seems to me currently, possibly because of the upfront payment and the lack of flexibility in appointing residuary beneficiaries, those who find those impediments less objectionable are those who actually are quite well off, and in fact some of them would have, and this is what a friend told me, she's a practitioner in the field, some of them could indeed afford a private trust, and on top of that set up an SNT scheme, because then you've got a double sort of safety net. And the good thing about this scheme is that you get the social services that you won't get in a private company, which is a great thing, because once you're in the scheme, you are within the care of the social welfare department. So if anything happens, you know that you can reach them quickly.
Thank you. Now, I think that there's one, in the interest of time, I think I would just take this last question. Okay. Oh, yeah, on the floor. Yep. Two, right? Two questions? Okay. All right. Okay.
Whether the settlor only puts cash into the scheme, which you appear to be nodding and sort of indicating that case. I understand that. Secondly, the 20,000 management fee, that's an annual management fee, right?
Yes.
Fixed, right?
Yes, it's fixed.
Yeah, it's a flat rate. No matter how many years. Well, currently it's 20,000. We don't know if the government will raise it in future, but currently, if you join the scheme now, the fee is 20,000 flat per year.
Okay, so there's a potential that the fee might increase
or decrease, because I think at the beginning it was 23,000 actually, so it's been cut back to 20,000.
I just want to follow up on the first question he asked about, say, the parent on the will pass on properties to the beneficiaries. So, because touch wood, anything happened, then the will be like putting all the cash into this SNT account. But how about the property then? You just leave it without touching it.
Yeah. Should I use them?
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. That's a great question. I should have mentioned it a bit more during my presentation. The government's policy, and that's, I think, an understandable policy, is that they would only take cash because management of property is a lot more cumbersome and generally quite expensive if you engage agents to manage a flat for you and all the rest of it. So the current approach is simply that it would only take cash. What about properties of the parents? So what they could provide for is that they could, for example, they could in the will provide that the executor should sell the flat on the parents' perhaps liquidate and inject the funds into the special needs trust account. And of course, you might ask the question, well, what if they still, where does the beneficiary live? I mean, one possibility is the beneficiary will just live on rented housing. Or alternatively, if you really want the beneficiary to continue to stay in that flat, you will have to make separate arrangements for somebody to sort of manage or look after that flat and let the beneficiary stay there. But that will be a separate arrangement from the special needs trust.
Okay. Thank you, Lusina. We have one question. Two, yes.
got a question about the termination of the trust. As you mentioned that about termination, there are two scenarios. First is when the trust fund is exhausted, and the second scenario is that the beneficiary has away or it breaks other places. I wonder if there is any alternative for them to terminate the trust. For example, when the settler is to arrive, if he or she is unsatisfactory with the service of the government, can she or he terminate the trust? Or the settler passed away and the beneficiary, he or she is already an adult and is also unsatisfactory with the arrangement, and he or she, let's say, terminate the.
Can we take the last question as well, because the simultaneous interpreter is about to come to you, so I just want to make full use of the time. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Just have a question about who can supervise the trust. It's like if you in a private trust, you can sometimes you can select one supervisor to supervise the money and the service the beneficiaries are getting. So just wondering who is to supervise this one, and what happens if you make the payment to the caregiver, but the caregiver is not doing the right work, and how can you terminate that?
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Lots of very good questions. Very quickly, essentially your idea is, what if either the settlor or the beneficiary finds that the fund was not satisfactorily managed, they're not happy with it, they just want out. Unfortunately, under the trust deeds, that's not possible. The trust, once it's set up, is not revocable. But one way, in a way, to get out of it, in effect, is just not to pump money into it, right? Because if there's no money into it, then you're out. And before the parents passes, there is a way for the parents to get out if the parent emigrates. So it is possible for you to take your money back if you emigrate. But that's just it. But if you just say that I'm not happy with the scheme and I want to take the money out, that's not possible. And the way to do it would be not to continue pumping money in and just use up whatever that's there. As to your question about who to supervise the caregiver, the Special Needs Trust Office would be doing that. They'll be making annual visits to the special needs beneficiary, and they'll be communicating with the caregiver. At the moment, their undertaking is one visit per year, and possibly, I don't remember if that was sorted out, but there was some talk of, for example, additional visits on extra charges. So probably some flexibility there.
Okay. I think in the interest of time, I just repeat the very last comments from the chat box. It's about why the assets in the trust considered in the DSS scheme, the Comprehensive Social Security Scheme, assistance scheme income, okay, and the asset assessment such that the disabled person would not be eligible for the Social Security assistance scheme. Okay, couldn't there be a carve out so that the trust asset can last longer? That is a comment, and I think we have touched on this. Like, do you have any response to that?
No, I mean, as Bill said,
yep,
you can avoid that by discretionary trust, but it's probably a policy.
Right. Yeah, I think, as we said, it would be very strange for the government to be setting up a scheme to enable people to basically have their cake and eat it, as they say, that you have the benefit of this trust fund, and you also have your Social Security benefits. They're seen as alternatives.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much for your questions, for your presentations and responses.